When you think mascot horror, what games do you think of? FNAF? Obviously. Poppy Playtime? Yeah, sure. Bendy? Of course. But what about Showdown Bandit? Now, I wouldn't blame you if you've never heard of this game. I mean, practically everybody I've asked has had zero idea what this even was. But what if I told you that this game was made by the same creators of Bendy and the Ink Machine? Kindly Beast, a now defunct game studio, released Showdown Bandit on September 17th, 2019. It was a top-down survival horror game where you take the role as the puppet mascot of a shut-down puppet show, as you try to defend yourself from the horrific creatures that want to tear you apart. The game was known for its interesting story and amazing visual style, plus the top-down view, which wasn't done by very many games at the time. It really stood against the rest. Unfortunately, it was cancelled and taken off Steam shortly after its release. The first chapter wasn't exactly very well received on release. This definitely wasn't expected since Kindly Beast had a ton of merch deals that were set in stone for the game. Because of how poorly it performed, it was taken off Steam and is unable to be downloaded. But thankfully, my good friend Dags was able to find an archived version of the game for me, so big props to him. Now, let's finally talk about what the game's about, shall we? You start off the game being let out of your case by Miss Undertaker. Once you exit the cutscene, you're able to move on to the next room, where you get your very own weapon, the Cork Shot, which will be your best friend for the rest of your playthrough. After some more dialogue with Miss Undertaker, you press on until you meet the banker, who performs as a safe station of sorts. After you meet the banker, you end up finding your way to the crossroads. In this room, there is a locked door which you need to pass there to progress. To find the key to the door, you have to head into the wild, and I feel like this is the perfect time to talk about the atmosphere of this game. God, is it creepy. It makes the whole studio feel dead, which just makes encounters with enemies that much more frightening, which I'll always appreciate. It also feels as if you're being watched the whole time, which is incredibly unnerving. After walking through the wilds, you end up finding your way to another safe area where another key NPC is introduced, Doc Carver. This guy will heal you up whenever you come up to him, which is very useful, because you'll be getting hit a lot. Also, I just really like his voice. It's just really cool. I like it a lot.
You must take care to guard your strings. I can mend them, of course.
Right after meeting the doctor, Penny Hemsworth makes her first appearance, and she is easily one of the creepiest characters in the game. In fact, it states in one of the notes you can find on the ground, she ripped out her eyes due to insanity, which is a horrifying visual. Also, yes, I said notes you find on the ground that reveals lore. Like, this is a mascot horror game. What do you expect? Unfortunately, she doesn't play a very big role in the game, which is really disappointing. I'm sure she would have in future chapters, but we all know where that went. Once you collect the key, you have to head back to the crossroads to finally enter the mines. Your first task in the mines is to retrieve a code for a puzzle, which is guarded by the Beast. This character is honestly one of the scariest foes you have to face, but we'll go more in depth on him later. After getting the code and having another interaction with Penny, you have to go back to punch in the code, and you're put into a goddamn minecart. Also, you're equipped with a fireworks launcher, and this as this extremely intense western music blares in the background. This section of the game honestly really confuses me because of the sudden tonal shift. Like, not even a second before this, you were met with an eerie atmosphere and a dark, solemn tone. If I'm being real though, it's a pretty neat transition to the next area. After your cart crashes into the wall, you must press on to the final area of the game, Dead Man's Gulch. Dead Man's Gulch is definitely the most visually interesting part of the game due to its very different color scheme compared to the rest of the areas. Oh yeah, and the fact that it's a giant graveyard. While the rest of the game is effectively a wooden wasteland, which is definitely a needed change of scenery, because it was getting really old. Shortly after you reach this area, you meet up with Miss Undertaker once again, and she asks you to go find her key that she lost in the graveyard. Also, she specifically asks you not to go beyond the gulch. Our asses will not be listening. As you walk around the eerie graveyard, you'll have to enter a house which is home to the arachnids. After an extremely, and I mean extremely, annoying segment, you get a key which will bring you to an area called Forbidden. Once you head over there, this final cutscene plays out. Now, the gameplay isn't exactly what you'd expect. Instead of using WASD to control the bandit, you actually have to click on your stage with the mouse to communicate where you want to go. In fact, you don't have to use your keyboard at all, which is a breath of fresh air compared to most other games. If only most of the game is just you walking around! Showdown Bandit is by far one of the slowest paced games I've ever played in my life. Even slower than the original Bendy, which is genuinely impressive. This is also a detriment to its atmosphere, since you have to listen to the same ambient track in silence, as you quite literally sit back in your chair and watch the bandit move. Yeah, I get this can be a common problem with isometric games, but it doesn't exclude having needless hallways where all you do is walk in a straight line. Ugh. Anyways, I'm sure you've all noticed by now, you have a weapon called the cork shot, but contrary to what you might think, you don't actually use it that much against enemies. Of course, there are situations where you can, but most of the time it's non-optimal. Showdown Bandit has a big focus on puzzles, and here's where the cork shot really shines. The cork shot is primarily used to shoot bells, which will unlock doors and unlock previously unavailable passageways. Most of the gameplay, not including walking in endless hallways, I feel like I'm gonna lose my mind. Most of the gameplay actually comes from maneuvering around the enemies to avoid their attacks. There are many enemies that you have to face against during your trek across the studio. But with this comes with my main problem. Every character acts the same. Of course, there are slight variations between them, but not enough to warrant making a whole new enemy. For example, the Greaves. They act exactly the same as the Stringless, but with a slightly longer ranged attack. Although there are some exceptions to this. Firstly, the game's main villain, the Faceless Bandit. At a surface level, he might seem like another clone of the Stringless, but you could never be more wrong. Throughout your playthrough, he will randomly appear, and when he does, you need to run, because he is quite a bit faster and smarter than the other puppets. And the most horrifying thing about him is that he can chase you through rooms. The main way of escape from the puppets is via leaving the room and in turn getting the puppets off your back. But the Faceless Bandit will continue to run after you. This makes him a lot more difficult to deal with and makes him way scarier. Now time for the second exception. Exception. The Beast. The Beast is a giant puppet that crawls its way around the stage, and oh my god, he freaked me out so much. And his mechanic is actually unique, and it plays well within the concept of it being a puzzle game. Pretty much what it does is it crawls in a set path, and you need to study his movements in order to find an opening so you can pass him. I absolutely love this mechanic because it uses the idea of maneuvering your way around the enemies and expands upon it. I just wish that other enemies were designed with the same puzzle theming in mind, because that would have made this game way more unique than any other mascot horror game. The game's art style is probably its strongest attribute, also something that Bendy excelled at. The entire game looks very hand-drawn and sketchy, and I love that. The environments are genuinely gorgeous, and some of the best I've ever seen in a mascot horror game, with how stylized and detailed everything is. It makes every room a spectacle to look at, which makes constantly walking around just a little bit more bearable. By the way, something I need to mention is that Showdown Bandit uses lighting in the coolest ways. For example, during Miss Undertaker's first monologue, you can only see her shadow from the window above, which I think looks fantastic. They even have a spotlight that follows the bandit, which is such amazing attention to detail. They even use lighting to highlight important areas like levers. I know this is basic game design, but still, I really like it. I really like it. But one glaring issue with the visuals in this game is the fact that the models are extremely low quality. They look really good when viewed from an isometric view, but when seen up close, they're extremely nauseating to look at, due to the low poly count and how blurry the textures are. Thankfully, you don't see them up close very often, but it still bothers me quite a lot. Is Showdown Bandit a good game? Not oh my god. Did it pick up? Did that pick up? No way. No. Is Showdown Bandit a good game? Not really. But even though this game has many, and I mean many, glaring issues, it still holds a special place in my heart due to how charming it is and how much it meant to me when it first came out. Like, I was obsessed. But I still think it's important to point out the problems in media you like. I wish Showdown Bandit could make a return, but that just isn't going to be possible in any time soon. But we can hope.